Good evening, everybody. We'll start today's meeting with our land acknowledgement. The West Hollywood Planning Commission acknowledges that the land on which we gather, and that is currently known as the City of West Hollywood, is the occupied, unceded, seized territory of the Gabrielino Tongva and Gabrielino Quiche peoples. I will now call this meeting to order. It is May 1st, 2025. It's about 6:33 p.m. At this time, I'd like to invite everyone to stand and follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Secretary Gilly, could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, and good evening, Commissioners. Tonight, Chair Lombardi is absent, so the voting record will reflect that, and we have our Vice Chair, Gregoire, filling in as the acting chair. Commissioner Solomon.
Here.
Commissioner Matos.
Present.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Hoopengarner.
Present.
Commissioner Carvalero.
Here.
Acting Chair Gregoire.
Here.
And we have a 6-member quorum.
Great, thank you so much. The next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Item 10A is a staff request to continue the item on 8451 Melrose Avenue to June 5th, 2025. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda, including a continuance of item 10A?
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second.
Confirming that was moved by Commissioner Matos, seconded by Commissioner Jones. And the motion carries by 6 ayes, approving the agenda as presented for Thursday, May 1st, 2025.
Great, thank you so much. Approval of the minutes. We have before us draft verbatim minutes for April 3rd, 2025. Do we have any corrections or edits? Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I have a correction.
Commissioner Hoopengarner?
I'm sorry, David. I don't have word search with me. You've got something marked SP in parens under Isaac, a quote from Isaac, and it is incorrect. And I am sorry, I can't find it.
Do you have a page number, or?
I don't. I carefully marked it in my office and walked away and left it there.
Okay, that's okay. You can forward that to me at a later time, but it's on the record that there is that correction to make.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. Is that okay that we make that correction?
Okay, I'm sorry, who seconded?
The second, okay?
I'll second.
Thank you. Moved by Commissioner Carvalero, seconded by Commissioner Matos. And the motion passes, noting 6 ayes. Approving the minutes for April 3rd, 2025, as noted with 1 correction by Commissioner Hoopengarner. And this will be noting Chair Lombardi absent of this vote.
Thank you so much. Public comment, this time limited to a maximum of 20 minutes, has been set aside for the public to address the Planning Commission on any item that is not set for public hearing or any item that is not on tonight's agenda. In accordance with the Brown Act, public comment relating to business not appearing on the agenda cannot be acted upon or discussed by the Commission during the meeting, but may be referred to staff for report on a future agenda, ordered, received, and filed, or referred to the proper department for administrative resolution. Staff requests that all persons wishing to address the Commission fill out a speaker slip and give it to the Commission Secretary prior to speaking. The Commission requests that when you begin speaking, you state your name and the name of the city where you reside. Individuals may address the Commission for up to 3 minutes each unless the Commission determines a different time. Mr. Secretary, do we have any public speakers?
Chair, we have no public speakers for this item.
Great. Director's report. Acting Director Alkier.
Thank you, Acting Chair Gregoire, and members of the Commission. Acting Director Jennifer Alkire here in for Nick Marisich, who is on leave. I have a few updates from the last City Council meeting. First of all, the City Council heard the Comedy Store billboard item. The Council voted to approve a slightly revised version of the board that was adjusted to accommodate concerns from the neighboring properties. At that same meeting on April 21st, the City Council passed an item related to round 2 of the Sunset Arts and Advertising program, or the billboard program. The Council action directed staff to vacate the scores given to all of the projects submitted under round 2 design excellence process and to allow all of the applicants who submitted design excellence screening applications to move forward with an application for a development agreement. The applicants have until January 7th, 2026 to submit an application, and all of these applications would go through the same process as each of the other development agreement applications that we've seen under the SAP program and that we continue to process under that program. Coming up on the May 5th Council on this coming Monday, there will be a discussion regarding major work plan priorities that the Council will be holding. In addition, the community development staff will be bringing a zone text amendment for the framework for ministerial housing permits. This is something that the Commission also saw and recommended. And a number of items related to the climate action and adaptation plan, including, and these include the climate action plan progress reports. And then one more thing to note is that at your last meeting on April 3rd, you heard an appeal for a minor amendment for an affordable housing project on Weatherly, and I just wanted to update that we have not received an appeal on that. The appeal period is closed, and so that project will move forward without further consideration of that item. And that is all I have tonight, unless you have questions for me.
Great. Any questions for Acting Director Alkire?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Consent calendar, we do not have any this evening. Projects subject to the Housing Accountability Act, we do not have any. We have item 10A, 8451 Melrose Avenue. In approving the agenda tonight, we have continued this matter to June 5th, 2025. Our next item is item 10B, which involves the property at 852 West Knoll Drive. Do we have a staff report?
Just trying to get the presentation ready. There we go. This is different than it was before. Here we go. All right. Good evening, Vice Chair and Commissioners. My name is Chad Brown, and I'm a contract planner working with the City of West Hollywood. The item before you is a request for the subdivision of an approved 4-story, 6-unit multifamily building with 14 subterranean parking spaces into a common interest development or condominium. The 7,680 square foot project site is located at 852 West Knoll Drive, south of Santa Monica Boulevard, within the R3C residential zone. The property faces west, and the city boundary is at the rear of the property. The development permit for the project was approved in January 14th, 2020. The tentative tract map was approved by the Planning Commission on May 21st, 2020, which expired on May 21st, 2022. The 4-story, 6-unit building is currently under construction and remains vacant. Since it has not been occupied, no tenant is being evicted or relocated. In the event the building is occupied by rental tenants prior to the condominium conversion, the owner shall follow the requirements of the rental conversion process under the city's municipal code. It is staff's assessment that the subdivision of the building will not be detrimental to the public welfare and is consistent with the city's zoning ordinance and general plan. Therefore, staff is recommending the Commission approve the subdivision request subject to the findings and conditions of the approvals set forth in the draft resolution. This concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to address any questions.
Great, thank you so much. Before we ask questions or hear from any applicant that may be present, do we have any commission disclosures? No disclosures. Any questions about the staff report?
Yeah.
Commissioner Solomon?
Just a quick question. Remind me, why is it that subdivision requests, regardless of the number, if it's 4 or 100, why do they come to the Planning Commission?
State law.
I'm not familiar with that. It's in the code. It's written into the code. So that's the first question.
I guess my question, in Commissioner Hoopengartner's hitting at it, is it state law or local ordinance?
It's state law.
State law.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hoopengartner?
Yeah, could you go back to your first slide?
Of course.
I'm confused. That looks like a property on La Cienega, not on West Knoll.
Let's see. I guess. Let's go to the last slide. That might be a little clearer. This, I'm not sure what's going on with that first slide. This is a better representation of the layout here. We have another slide at the end that also illustrates the location facing West Knoll here.
Okay, so the first slide is incorrect.
Apparently.
So if I think so, on the first slide right there, to the left of the highlighted West Knoll Drive is identified, and that dashed line at the rear of the property, that is the city boundary between West Hollywood and Los Angeles. And
No,
so,
but the yellow highlighted area is a different property altogether. It's a
Yeah.
property on La Cienega.
I believe it slid over on accident because this is the subject site.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear because this didn't align with anything that we had seen.
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
I would note on page 2 of the staff report, there is a photograph and the subject site is identified differently. My guess is, are we correct that the picture on page 2 is correct?
It looks like it's
Yeah.
been inverted is what happened.
it looks like it slid
It
over.
was flipped.
Yeah. I think
It
it
slid
slid
over
over.
to the right. And I just wanted to, for the record, I wanted that to be
Sure.
clear because
Thank you.
we're voting on something that, okay, so, yeah, because I drove by the property.
Yeah.
I know where it is, and it is on West Knoll. Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Secondly, as we've discussed a number of times in these, and I couldn't find anywhere in the previously approved resolutions mentions about the requirements for street parking, i.e. the prohibition against street parking for new construction that should go into the CCNRs for
CCNRs.
building upon issuing this track map.
Okay.
So my recommendation should, once we get to discussion, is, first of all, where is it? And second of all, should it be in here to say, no, there's no street parking, and make it very clear that upon issuance of the CCNRs, there is no street parking, other than the 50 permits that they're allowed per year, yada, yada.
so Doug Wu, department staff here. So condition 1.6 of the proposed resolution identifies that by reference, this approval would also include the resolution for the approval of the project under MP 17-061. And within that resolution, condition 10.6 is the resolution that you are referring to, Commissioner Hoopengartner, that specifically states that no residential parking permits will be issued for residents of this building. Furthermore, it states that that condition of approval shall be included in the CCNRs for the project, as well as lease agreements, should any of those units be rented. And so what happens is, after the Planning Commission approves the tentative map, the applicant will submit the CCNRs for staff to review and verify that that is indeed in there before it is allowed to go before the City Council for approval of the final map.
Okay. We've just seen these things slide through the cracks, so that's my concern. Okay. Those are my questions.
Great. Any other commissioner questions? Do we have an applicant presentation this evening?
Not this evening.
Great. Public comments. Do we have any public comments?
Chair, we are all clear.
Great, great. At this point, I will close the public comments, the public hearing, and we'll go to deliberation. Who would like to begin?
I
We have
can
a
begin.
motion.
I can begin, unless anyone else, I mean, of course, I'm open to hearing discussion, but I would be inclined to move this forward as recommended in the staff report.
Second.
I can actually make an official motion to move it forward.
Great,
I seconded.
great. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, let's go to the vote. Motion passes.
And the motion passes, so it's 6 ayes, noting Chair Lombardi absent on this vote. We do have an appeal process. The Planning Commission, the resolution the Planning Commission just approved memorializes the Commission's final action on this matter. This action is subject to appeal to the City Council. Appeals must be submitted within 10 calendar days from this date to the City Clerk's office. Appeals must be in writing and accompanied by the required fees. The City Clerk's office can provide appeal forms and information about waiver of fees. And the appeal deadline will be Monday, May 12th, 2025 at 5 p.m.
Great, thank you so much. We'll move on to item 10C, which is a zone text amendment involving electric vehicle charging sites and service stations. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, we do. And thank you, Acting Chair Gregoire and Commissioners. Tonight's presentation will be presented to you by Jordan Parrish, who is our contract city planner. So while he sets that up, it's coming up on the screen now. So take it away.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jordan Parrish. I am a contract planner from Rincon Consultants, working with the Long Range Planning Department. The item before you this evening is for the Planning Commission to consider a zone text amendment to designate EV charging sites and EV service stations as primary uses in designated commercial zones. During this presentation, I will provide a summary of state and local requirements for EV charging permitting and an overview of the proposed zone text amendment, which has 3 components. An EV-related code cleanup, adding EV charging sites as a primary use, and adding EV service stations as a primary use while upholding the city's ban on fossil fuel service stations. This presentation will take approximately 5 minutes. The energy and transportation focus areas of the WeHo Climate Action and Adaptation Plan include goals to expand publicly accessible EV charging infrastructure throughout the city. These local goals also support broader state goals to phase out gasoline-only vehicles by 2035. However, a lack of public EV charging infrastructure continues to be a significant barrier to more widespread EV adoption. There are currently approximately 28,000 public EV chargers in Los Angeles County compared to an estimated 400,000 registered EVs. To address this issue, the state has enacted 2 laws requiring that permits for EV charging facilities be approved through non-discretionary processes and within strict timeframes. Cities may only deny such permits based on specific documented public health or safety concerns. The City of West Hollywood is in compliance with these requirements. However, state law also allows cities to determine where EV charging sites may be located. If a city does not designate permitted zones, EV charging sites may be established by right in any zone, leaving the city with little to no authority to deny them. The most effective solution is to clearly identify the zones in West Hollywood that are appropriate for standalone EV charging sites as a primary use, a recommendation also supported by state guidance. While the city already complies with state law, this zone text amendment is necessary to establish two new EV charging related categories as primary uses: EV charging sites and EV service stations. Okay. There are three components to the zone text amendment. The first is a general cleanup of EV-related code to help clarify nomenclature and adjust internal references. The full summary of these changes is included in attachments A and B of the staff report. The key definitions that were added clarify the differences between various forms of EV infrastructure, which are currently used interchangeably, creating ambiguity and confusion. On the upper right hand of this slide is an image of an EV charging station, which is an individual EV charging device. For the rest of this presentation, I will use EV charging station to refer to an individual charging device. On the bottom right, there is an image of an EV charging site, which is essentially a parking lot or other parking structure with multiple EV charging stations and no other uses or services. This zone text amendment adds EV charging site as a standalone primary use. And finally, on the bottom left, there is an EV service station, which essentially functions like a traditional gas station, but with EV charging stations instead of fuel pumps. The zone text amendment adds this as a primary use as well. The second component of the zone text amendment is to add EV charging sites as a primary use. This change specifies in which commercial zone standalone EV charging sites may be built. As previously discussed, state law requires cities to permit EV charging sites by right and encourages jurisdictions to identify appropriate zones for this use. If a city does not specify where these sites may be permitted, they may be allowed in any zone by default, limiting the city's ability to guide their placement. To address this, the CN zone was selected as the most appropriate location for standalone EV charging sites. This zone is primarily located along Melrose Avenue and Robertson Boulevard and has the least potential for future housing development. By contrast, other commercial zones in West Hollywood are more suitable for high density and mixed income housing. Allowing EV charging sites by right in those areas could reduce opportunities for new housing production and undermine the city's housing goals. However, note that EV charging stations can be built as an accessory use or as an amenity in all zones within the city. This zone text amendment will not limit EV charging facilities in these contexts, meaning that the zones listed here which exclude EV charging sites will still permit EV charging sites, EV charging stations as an accessory or amenity use. This includes the Sunset specific plan and the Pacific Design Center specific plans. To help clarify these terms, these two images show EV charging as an accessory use or amenity. Note that in these cases, EV charging is supporting the primary use. On the left, it's a grocery store, and on the right, it's a mixed-use building with public parking. These sorts of EV charging stations can be built virtually anywhere in the city, and the zone text amendment will not change that. Contrast that with this image, which shows an EV charging site as a primary standalone use. Here you can see that this is basically a parking lot with EV charging stations added. There are no bathrooms, stores, or other uses on this particular lot. This zone text amendment will add this particular use to the CN zone only. Finally, the third component of the zone text amendment is adding EV service stations as a primary use in designated commercial zones. EV service stations differ from EV charging sites as they function like traditional gas stations with shops and services, but with charging stations instead of fuel pumps. The language of the zone text amendment carefully adapts the city's existing service station requirements to fit the needs of an electric future while upholding the city's ban on fossil fuel service stations. Unlike EV charging sites, which the state requires all jurisdictions to approve by right, These EV service stations are permitted by CUP as they are an emerging use, which will likely require greater discretion in public input. This greater discretion also makes it feasible to permit them in a greater number of zones because they're less likely to have a negative impact on the city's housing goals. Under the zone text amendment, they will be permitted in the same zones as fossil fuel service stations were previously. To help illustrate what an EV service station may look like, here is a brand new EV service station in Santa Ana, which has a miniature Gelson's as well as a lounge and public restrooms. This essentially recreates the typical gas station experience. However, it is also important to note that EV service stations are not subject to the same fire hazard and ventilation requirements as gas stations, so there are many other forms they could take that lead to lots of possibilities that are better suited for a dense urban environment like West Hollywood. To illustrate this, here is an EV service station in San Francisco that is built in a repurposed bus depot. To summarize, this zone text amendment has three components. The first is adding EV-related definitions and conducting a general code cleanup of EV-related language. The second is adding language to permit and regulate EV charging sites. And the third is adding language to permit and regulate EV service stations while upholding the city's ban on fossil fuel service stations. This concludes my presentation. I will pass it over to Francisco.
Yeah. Thank you, Jordan. Commissioners, we just wanted to note that we did receive some correspondence from, on behalf of the Pacific Design Center, sort of just, inquiring about the impact of this particular ZTA to the Pacific Design Center. But we've since then clarified that this actually would not impact the Pacific Design Center because they are not considering ever demolishing the Pacific Design Center and putting in EV charging site as a primary use on the site. So we clarified that EV charging sites are possible in the Pacific Design Center as accessory use, just not as the primary use of the site. Since we clarified that, they have withdrawn their comment letter. You may not have seen that correspondence that came in kind of late before the meeting. So we've clarified it and they're comfortable with the proposed ZTA. Thank you. That concludes our presentation.
Great, thank you so much. Before we have questions of staff, are there any disclosures? Hearing none, do we have questions for staff?
I have a question.
Commissioner Hoopengarner.
I'm going to start with legal. Are we required to allow service station, let me get the right language here, service stations on lots that could provide housing? Do we have the ability to describe which types of lots and how they're zoned in terms of where they can be located according to state law?
So my understanding of the state law that covers this area is that they've established the by right that there needs to be ministerial approval. I'm not aware of, if I'm understanding your question correctly, the city does maintain discretion in terms of the service station, but the service station is not necessarily defined by state law. That's something that the city is creating as a separate definition.
So for example, if we're looking at a lot within the SSP that it could be and is currently zoned for mixed use, multifamily, et cetera, we could prohibit that from becoming a service station so as to make sure to protect the future housing.
I don't think state law allows a prohibition. What we can do is what we're doing here, which is to create conditions and to define in which zones that would be allowed.
Well, I guess where I'm trying to get at as what I don't see in this code is anything that says if something is zoned in a way that allows housing, are we going to allow that to just be disregarded and made a station, an EV charging
It
station?
would be available.
Okay, so that's my question. I mean, and I guess my question is, the state has given us mixed orders here. You know, thou shalt build housing, and now we shalt build service stations. And how do we come to an understanding of what's the priority? You know, if someone, because this is convoluted, and the reason I'm asking you is because there's also a language in here that says the last person to come to us that wants one of these service stations that would cut into our threshold on RENA numbers has to be denied. Well, what about the first two or the first three?
Yeah, I mean, we do have to take into consideration the no net loss rules. So you know, that is something that is continuing to be monitored. So if there is a lot that is available in a mixed use zone, and this is a permitted use, that is something that would be considered.
So if we have, let's say on the Sunset Strip, we have 3 empty lots, and we actually have a couple of empty lots. And the first one that comes to us wants to build a service station, and for whatever calculation reason, we realize that won't cut into our 3,933 or whatever our number is, right? Arena number. And the second one that comes doesn't cut into it, but the third one does. It's the third one under this structure that would be denied, but not the first two, even though they would preclude housing.
Well, because there's still choices in a mixed use in terms of what that combination is going to be. And so it just depends where the city is with regard to its RENA numbers and what is in the housing element as potential identified lots. So if a lot that's in the housing element is listed, and that's one of the lots that's being considered for a service station, then there would have to be, the city would have to consider that from a no net loss perspective and find alternatives.
But what if a lot is not identified, but it would still potentially reduce us below our RENA numbers?
It doesn't work that way in the sense that if there's availability for development, the developer could come and it has to make financial sense for them. So if doing the service station is what they're proposing and that lot is not identified under the housing element, then that is certainly something that can be presented.
Okay. I'm just trying to get at, you know, across the Sunset Strip, for example, those are all zoned for multifamily housing. So I'm trying to reconcile in my brain, wait a minute, but go ahead, never mind the housing, you can build a service station. And what's the state is giving us 2 different directions for the same piece of property and their requirements. So I'm trying to reconcile in my brain, which law are we supposed to follow?
Those 2 things, I mean, they're competing priorities, but they're not inconsistent with each other, right? So if it's mixed use, then that means that there can be housing and there can be commercial development, including service stations. Now, I'm not as familiar, maybe Jen can weigh in terms of the housing element itself, but my understanding, or I don't know, would that be Francisco? Okay. I'll defer to staff in terms of the housing element and the lots. So like in the example she's giving, there's 3 lots. Not everything would be identified in the housing element as targeted for housing. So maybe one of the 3 is, but the other 2 are not.
Yeah. And I mean, I would say that depending on the application that comes in, right, I cannot guess what's going to be presented to us. But because we have greater discretion with a conditional use permit, like we have greater discretion to deny a conditional use permit than we do something that is considered by right. So I think we have a little bit more authority to say, this actually doesn't meet the public, benefit or the, because we are reducing the number of potential housing that's, a potential on this property. So we have a little bit more leeway to actually deny a CUP than we do just by right proposal.
I think this is really important, and it gets to the crux of this whole thing, so that's why I'm really pushing on it. And let's just use that property that's up, between Hilldale and Hammond, that's been a vacant lot for 40 years? You know what one I'm talking about, the ones that they always put the street side billboards on? It's a vacant lot. It's been used as a parking lot, okay? And it's a city block wide. If that owner came to us under this code and wanted to put a service station there, and it is zoned for mixed use, et cetera, under this code, would we be obligated to approve it?
No. They would have to apply for a conditional use permit. So there's nothing guaranteeing that it has to be approved. They have to come and be reviewed by the Planning Commission and be able to make the findings in order to approve the project.
But if it's by right, how would we be able to deny it?
No, we're only allowing the actual use as a primary use in that zone. We're not saying it's allowed by right.
But I thought that's what the state law said, that this had to be by right.
No. That we'd have to establish in a zone the use as a primary use. So we have the two different categories. We have the electric vehicle charging site, and then we have the electric vehicle charging station. So the electric vehicle charging site, we do need to find one zone, at least in the city, where we have to make it a primary use that's allowed by right, and that's the
CN.
The CN zone.
Right.
The service station, the larger big, service station, that we're saying only with a CUP could you do that in any of the zones that we've shown on the slide. So it's not by right. The service station is not done by right. But the site, just the fixtures, basically an empty parking lot with that we need to permit in at least one zone. Otherwise, they're permitted in every zone.
Okay. And so you just said an important word, in at least one zone. But in this proposed ZTA, you've got four zones.
For the conditional use permit.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. I don't want to belabor it, but I think it's really important that we understand exactly, what we're giving and what we're getting up, and given the conflicting state laws that are pushing us in two different directions, and our mission about housing, this is potentially threatening that housing. And I don't want us to get stuck with a code that says you have to approve this.
Yeah.
When in fact it's especially if it's one of our RENA sites.
Yeah, correct, right.
Is there a way for us to specifically exclude our RENA sites? It's part of our, we have a document, right? We have
So yeah, the state is only mandating us to do the service sites, or the EV charging sites. So, bottom right-hand corner.
They're not mandating that we do service stations.
They're not mandating that we do service stations, correct.
So we could exclude them completely.
We could exclude them completely from the zone text amendment, right?
Oh,
And what
okay.
we're saying is we see this as a land use that is being implemented in other kind of like dense cities that have a lot of EV vehicles, kind of like in our region. And so we're saying if we are to allow these, we should allow them, but through a conditional use permit, because then we have more authority to deny them if they happen to be applying in a property that could be developed with a lot of housing, and that's not what we want.
Okay, I'll leave the rest of that for deliberations, but I just really wanted to flesh out those questions. Okay. Number 2, why are you recommending allowing 2 per intersection? Is there a specific reason? It's on.
That's a carryover from the previous service station language. So that was a standard that was in the city when it previously permitted fossil fuel service stations.
Which we no longer permit.
Correct.
So
Yes.
that's within our discretion to maybe discuss.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, there's no page numbers on this red line, so I'm going to just have to go by section 13. Big D, number 4, which is, I guess, on the second to the last page, top of the second to last page. Vending machine sales, provided that no more than 3 machines shall be allowed, and the machine shall be placed next to and within 36 inches of the main structure. I don't quite understand what that means. It's either next to or within, and you can't have a vending machine in the middle of the room. I don't understand what this means. Can you please explain it?
That's also language that's carried over from the previous service station ordinance. I believe if I'm interpreting that now, I would interpret that as saying that it simply needs to be next to the structure and also no farther than 36 inches from the structure.
So at a minimum, perhaps we could clean up the language if we don't decide to actually. Okay, thank you. On to the next one, number 5. Other uses which are comparable in terms of scale and scope, which are provided for in the respective zoning district, may be permitted subject to approval by the planning director. What is this anticipated to address?
This is anticipated to address the fact that EV service stations are a relatively new and novel use. There's not a lot of established best practices yet. So this is an intention to sort of leave the door open for other creative uses that could be approved by the Planning Commission in the future, or by the Planning
Commission
Director.
or Planning Director?
Pardon me, the Planning Director in the future.
Okay. That's it for my questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Matos.
Thank you, Chair Gregoire, and thank you, staff, for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions. The first is in line with the public comment we received. I understand, in the staff report, specifically on page 5, there's really important language. It says, notably, EV charging stations can still be installed in all zones as an accessory use or amenities, so there's no need to permit them as primary uses citywide. I think that's important context that could address some confusion in the line of the public comment that we've received, with willing participants who are eager to install EV charging resources as an accessory use to their property. Do you feel that it is appropriate or needed to add language to that effect into the findings section of the proposed zone text amendment to clarify that? My concern being, I don't want someone who potentially owns an existing property that is willing to provide, especially if it's parking as a public resource like the Pacific Design Center, that wants to provide EV charging and then maybe is dissuaded or discouraged by a misconception by the lack of clarity in this proposed zone text amendment. Is there language that addresses that? I looked through the resolution, I didn't see any in the findings, but I wanted to see if that would be appropriate or was considered.
Yeah, we can revise it to include that language in the resolution, but it's currently not there.
Yeah, okay, I think that could be discussed during deliberations, but again, we want to ensure that passing this zone text amendment, when folks in the future are looking to our code, that they understand that EV charging is still able to be entitled as an accessory use without this type of conditional use permit process. to existing properties, right? Existing commercial areas, existing residential areas. I'll leave that question there. My second question, also very straightforward. In the resolution on page 13, section D, it talks about incidental services associated with EV charging stations as a primary use, which is before us right now. There's mentions about grocery stores or convenience stores of less than 3,500 feet and restaurants of less than 3,000 feet. I just want to clarify from my understanding, with those square footage markers, is it that once, for example, we're seeing a lot of really innovative proposals for EV charging stations with restaurants, with different services, grocery, convenience stores, things like that. Is it that intended that once the square footage of these specific call-outs go over that amount, that it moves to an accessory use? What is the intention there? I guess my question is, at what point does it move from an accessory use to a primary use? So if the restaurant is 4,000 square feet, does that mean it's a primary restaurant use?
Yeah, so typically, the way our code reads now is for accessory uses, you have to be, I think, no more than 25% of the primary use.
Okay.
And so, typically that's sort of a guardrail.
Yeah.
We are looking into amending that, and that will come before you at a separate hearing.
Got it.
So typically that's sort of our threshold if you go above 25%.
Got it.
25%, right?
And that was my understanding as well, but I was just trying to get at what these call-outs as far as square footage for these specific incidental services mean in terms of this zone text amendment.
Right. I think the 3,500 square feet, we did take a look at other similar kind of what do we call it? Stores at service stations, like the Quickie Marts, for example. Those are typically around that square footage. And we also kind of took a look at what might be like an average square footage for a restaurant. We don't have these, but fast food service stations, fast food service that could be provided at a service station. So those are the average square footages for those. So we thought, okay, let's just find a square footage that might be adequate and average for the industry.
Okay. So in the event that someone, because we're seeing a lot of, I think you hit on it appropriately, we're seeing a lot of really new, innovative things that are coming in terms of EV charging to future plan for the accessibility of EVs. This would preclude any space over those square footage just based on the averages? Is that the intent?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we were trying to just put a maximum on how big these additional accessory uses could get within the stations.
And just one last question, is there precedent for that with other cities or other zone text amendments? Is that something that's been kind of standard?
Those numbers are based on what we have seen in other cities, but there aren't many examples that we can point to on this.
Got it.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious as to why we would limit, if someone wanted to build a 4,000 square foot restaurant and an EV charging station, what the impetus for that would be. Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Solomon?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First, I wanted to ask about a hypothetical. Let's say we have a current existing combustion engine service, a gas station here in West Hollywood that one day wants to convert, hopefully they all will, to being an EV service station. I'm on the draft resolution on page 13 of 15. If that gas station completely converted, totally converted over to an EV service station, on page 13 in section E, we have the list of prohibited activities. What if that gas station previously had already offered a car wash there? I'm thinking in particular of the one on Holloway. Now it's converting over to being an EV service station. We have here before us to put into our code that the car wash is prohibited, is there a grandfather status that's granted if a gas station already has one of these prohibited activities there? If they, if they already do upholstery work, if they already do have a rental there, how does that work when someone converts?
So typically those, because we don't allow service stations at all anymore, so those are all sort of grandfathered uses. Typically, we allow grandfathered uses to remain if they're improving their site and enhancing the site, removing fossil fuel dispensers to put in EV chargers. We would have to review that sort of as an enhancement to their existing grandfathered use. I believe we would allow them to keep those existing uses because they're not making any changes to them. As soon as you start making changes to those particular uses, we would probably not allow that. So if they were to want to tear down the car wash and build a new one, well, that is no longer protected through the grandfather clause anymore. If they maintain what is there and maybe remodels to maintain them, and that might be possible, but not full redo of what's been grandfathered.
And is that what you just described in this grandfathering process, and whether it sounds like subjectively, I would agree that replacing the pump with the charger is an improvement, but that's a subjective statement. I guess, is there a place in the code where I just don't want to run into the hypothetical where somebody that owns a service station wants to make it an EV service station and they are prohibited from doing that conversion because they will lose some aspect of their business, the most obvious one being the car wash. Is that spelled out somewhere in the code, or can it be spelled out here?
Yeah, I can find that section. We do have a section for legal non-conforming uses in the code. I'm just trying to find it in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
So I'll try and find it for you.
Let me move on to my other question, and it's a little bit more of a thought problem, but when we're dialing in on the word primary use, at what point does a surface parking lot become an EV charging site? I mean, inherent in charging your car is parking it. So take 8120 Santa Monica Boulevard, for example. That's the brand new city interim surface parking lot. It's got, I think, 50 spots there, and there's 5 EV chargers. So we would not call that an EV charging site because charging is not the primary purpose there. At what point, though, if they put a charger in every single parking spot, at what point is it an EV charging site? I mean, on the pictures that you showed to us that are up on the screen right now, an EV charging site is a parking lot with a charger on it.
Yeah, so it would be every single spot would have a charger.
So if 100% of the parking spots, if there is just a single parking spot that doesn't have a charger, it is not an EV charging site. It is a parking lot with a bunch of EV charging stations?
Yes. It's worth mentioning that the city doesn't allow standalone parking besides its own lots. So we wouldn't allow that. It would have to have all EV charging to be approved as a primary use.
So that brings me to, since we preclude public facilities from having EV charging sites, what if the parking garage where Barry's is located, Barry's is bottom, what if we wanted to put, and one day I think this will be the norm, we'll put a charger in every single spot. I think at some point 50 years in the future, I mean, I know my apartment complex is already considering doing that, putting a charger in every single spot. If we put it, right now, since EV charging sites under this proposed resolution are not allowed in zone PF, we can't do that, correct?
I think you could work around it. So for the City Hall parking lot on Kings, since that parking lot is an accessory to the building, which has businesses, you could add the chargers to all parking spots as accessories.
Okay, so take the berries portion out of it and just be hypothetical. If it's just a city parking garage and you put a charger, I guess my point is I don't understand why we would regulate the government in that sort of way.
Yeah, there is also a catch-all in the zoning ordinance where we can exempt the city from our own zoning regulations. So there is a.
So why why take PF out in this table?
So the EV charging site as a primary use is used to, we're imagining like a vacant lot that would then put that in. If you already have a parking lot that is permitted, you could add the EV chargers to all the spots through accessory. But
And that would no longer be, but if you add it to all of them, isn't it now, you said if it's 100%, isn't it now the primary use of that site, that it's charging, even though they're parking too?
It would technically become that, but this is more to prevent, the CTAs prevent like vacant lots become, let's say, demoing a space and putting in EV charging sites anywhere. So that's why it's restricted to CN.
I understand that piece of it. I just don't know why we would preclude PF also from the allowed zones. If the city wants to do an EV charging site, that'll be up to the leadership and vote at that time. That's more of a deliberation. Well, Jennifer, did you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I just want to just clarify a couple of things. Just I think the way we're thinking about this, I want to make sure that we're understanding that parking associated with a use on a site is just parking. And even if that parking area takes up more than the use on the site, it's still parking for the use, and it doesn't become a primary use. The parking area is not considered, we don't consider parking as like an accessory use to the main use on the site, right? So if somebody added EV chargers to that, it doesn't become part of the use. It just becomes a supporting requirement or a supporting aspect of the site for, let's say, the restaurant or whatever's on the site. So just like in the zoning ordinance, you'll notice that parking is not necessarily an allowed primary use in certain zones, or it has other restrictions. But if you have a use and you're required or you choose to have parking for that use, that can take up whatever amount of the space that it needs to take up on the site, or a structure or whatever. And that doesn't, you don't have to get that permitted as an accessory use. It's just to support the use that's already on the site. So the same rules would apply if they put chargers in those spaces that support the use that's already on the site. Does that make sense? It doesn't change it to be the primary use.
This is the same example as the Pacific Design Center, right? If they wanted to
Correct.
put 100% of their parking spaces as EV chargers,
Correct.
it's not that the Pacific Design Center is a primary use for EV charging, it's
Correct.
that they're using it as an accessory use.
It's not even an accessory use, it's part of the use, right?
Oh,
so like,
okay.
you say pavilions, they have a whole bunch of parking. It probably takes up more square footage because it's a surface lot, than the actual store. But we're not having an argument whether parking is the primary use on the site. The primary use on the site is a grocery store. So the same thing would apply. So if they put EV chargers and all of that, it would still be parking for that site.
Okay, so to walk back, I guess what was said earlier, if there is a public facilities parking site, parking garage, that is 100% parking, and those exist, and we put a charger in every single spot, that is not an EV charging site. That is still just parking on a PF. I mean, parking and charging happen at the same time is kind of
Well, I guess that's
Right, and if it's a city lot, as Francisco pointed out, then this would, so if the entire question is, why are we taking it out of the PF zone? I think
Why are we regulating ourselves?
I think that is either way that we go. The city's projects are exempt from the city's ordinances. So if there's something else that we come with a general plan consistency finding, as you guys have seen. So it's not that we're not looking at them or evaluating the projects to make sure that they're consistent with the city's policies, but we have a general plan consistency finding, but the zoning ordinance doesn't necessarily apply strictly to those projects.
It's a nice ace to have up your sleeve.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, initially, the state really only requires us to choose one zone. Well, we can choose more zones, but we're saying, like, you know, for the analysis that we did, I think, you know, as long one zone's enough, CN's enough, and we could add, you know, PF, but, you know, we probably don't want to also highlight that we're encouraging standalone parking as primary use, even in public facilities, even if we wanted to, because we actually want to focus more on potentially mixed-use or housing development or something better than just standalone primary use.
And I think you made a really good point, though, that we have part of our code is you can't just build a parking lot. In fact, we had a vacant lot in my neighborhood that somebody just wanted to turn into, you know, a parking lot with corrugated roof, you know, carports. And it initially got approved by a contract staff person, and when the neighborhood said, no, see all the places in the code where you can't do surface parking, period? You know, so whether there's a charger on it or not is irrelevant. Surface parking lots are not allowed, correct? Unless they're part of a grocery store or whatever. But if you want to take a lot and turn it into a surface parking lot, it is not allowed in the city of West Hollywood.
Not as a primary use.
Not as a primary use. So that's not a thing, other than the city itself can do it.
Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the city itself,
but the
not
city
a
itself can do
neighborhood
whatever it wants.
I mean, based upon what I heard from Jennifer, it doesn't matter if it's allowed in PF or not, because the rules don't apply to PF.
Correct.
So,
Right. I mean, we could bring it forward. We could say it's consistent. If that were to come forward, we don't like to speak in theoreticals, but we could bring it home and bring it here and say that it's consistent with the general plan. That would be a finding that the commission would have to make.
Are there any questions? Commissioner Cavallero or Commissioner Jones, any questions?
I think I can hold mine till deliberation. I understand what you're saying, Commissioner Solomon, but I'm going to withhold my theoretical question until we're in deliberation.
Commissioner Matos?
Thank you, Chair. I actually just have a quick question because I agree and understand where Commissioner Solomon is coming from. So my question is going to be aimed at supporting that train of thought. By not including PF in this ZTA does not preclude the city from going in and putting in charging stations in their public facilities uses. Is that correct? So the city would maintain the ability to go and add charging as a public resource on public facilities zoned areas.
Yeah, correct. And we're encouraged to do so because we have some
climate
goals, especially EV charging, public EV charging station goals that we have to meet by 2035. So we want to incorporate as much EV charging as possible wherever we can.
Got it. I think that's kind of at the heart of, maybe I'm wrong, but just ensuring that we're not regulating ourselves out of these goals of having charging infrastructure available as a public resource wherever possible and on public facilities, zoned parcels.
Correct.
Thank you.
And if I did find an answer to Chair Solomon's question regarding the non-conforming uses. So there is a code section 19.72.050, which deals with non-conforming uses. And it states that a non-conforming use shall not be enlarged or increased to occupy a greater floor area or portion of the site than it lawfully occupied before becoming a non-conforming use. But alterations which do not increase or enlarge a non-conforming use may be approved. So alterations are allowed, just no increasing in natural.
You can't make it a bigger car wash.
You can't make it.
Okay.
Right.
Great. If there are no other questions, let's go to public comment. Secretary Gillig, do we have any public comment?
Chair, we have no public comment for this item.
Great, terrific. I will close the public comment section of this hearing, and let's go to deliberation. Who would like to start? Commissioner Matos.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank staff for bringing forward this zone text amendment before us. I'm very in support of this item. I think that the city should look at every opportunity to integrate charging infrastructure, and also to Commissioner Solomon's point, which I think is a brilliant one, looking at opportunities to have in the code the ability to convert an existing fueling station into an EV charging station. It's not about taking away housing stock, right? It's about having the ability for these types of conversions as we move into a new era of clean energy. The one thing that I would say that I feel very strongly that I would love for the body to consider if they would oblige is adding in language into the findings section of the zone text amendment in line of what we saw in the staff report, which addresses the heart of some of the public comments that we received. EV charging stations can still be installed in all zones as accessory uses or amenities, so there's no need to permit them as primary uses citywide. Something to that effect, clarifying language in the code. That way people understand, if, for example, with Commissioner Solomon's point, if there is a Barry's with parking garage on top, even if it wasn't city-owned, because I know it is city-owned, they would still be able to add EV charging to 100% of their spaces and not be considered a primary use and not be subject to a conditional use permit. Same thing with other areas across the city, just having that clarity. Pacific Design Center is a great example. They have public parking available as a resource, and by their desire, and I commend them on that, to add EV charging as an amenity. Potentially, I think that's a great thing. We just want to make sure that our code is clear in describing that those that wish to add that as an amenity or resource are not subject to the conditional use permit as a primary use. I think some clarity in that, would be great. But other than that, I'm very supportive of the item. I think that we need to do everything that we can to have opportunities to convert the existing fossil fuel infrastructure that we have in this city into clean resources, clean energy resources for public charging and public uses and any type of charging in that vein. And I'll just leave it at that, and I hope the colleagues would consider and support that type of amendment into the zone text amendment, specifically the findings section, so that way people, when they're looking at this, understand when it does and does not apply, so we don't see that type of misunderstanding.
Great. Do any commissioner object to Commissioner Matos' suggestion? Okay. Commissioner Jones, you want to go next?
So I don't have any problem, if I understand what you're saying, with in some way codifying within the language of the resolution that we are not encouraging people to convert existing sites. To me, that feels implicit, because if people can find a loophole in the code, I think we know that they will. But if people feel more comfortable with us making that, official in some way, I don't have an issue with that. And for the sake of clarity, my question actually speaks to something that Commissioner Matos brought up, which is again on, it's in the red line on page 7, item 13, section D. Is there a reason we would not do percentages of the total square footage of the site as opposed to kind of predetermined averages? Because to me, what this reads is, what you don't want is like someone's like, oh, we're going to build, an EV charging site. I don't want to conflate the terms. I'm already getting them confused in my head. Stations, sorry. And it's like you don't want there to be a situation where it's like, oh, there's a charging station with a convenience store on it, instead of like, oh, there's this giant, structure or restaurant that has a few electric charging sites. Like, you want it to be for the explicit purpose of electric charging in whatever capacity or whatever volume. So I'm just curious to know if we would, or if it makes sense to, because I have to imagine there's a very good reason why it is this way, so I don't want to kind of doubt our predecessors' work. But if there's a reason we wouldn't just make it a percentage of the total square footage of the site, like not to exceed 25% or 20% of the total square footage of the property.
like concurrent with existing code? Because that's what they were saying, is that the existing code is the primary use.
Right, but you don't want it to
25%.
exceed 25%. But
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if maybe that's more clear than
Versus
these.
prescribing the square footage. I was
Right,
thinking the same thing.
right.
Well, I think your point is really well taken, and when I looked at this, my question is, okay, first of all, is the restaurant itself 3,000 square feet, or is the whole project 3,000 square feet? And what's to distinguish someone wants to build a restaurant with some parking that happens to have some EV charging stations versus a charging
That's what I'm saying.
site that happens to have a restaurant on it.
Right.
You know, it's like who's to define which it is?
Or, and please staff check me on this, in your view, is this something you would just back out? Like you would just back it out and say, oh, like it can't exceed 3,500 square feet as long as that's not more than 25%. Like what makes more sense? Like I do want you to weigh in on this. So again, there's a reason that it's this way, but I'm just wondering if it can't be a little more clear.
We prefer to like percentages more than prescriptive. We took sort of like what we found as the average, in some
Right.
of these new uses. Nobody else has this in their code. We're probably one of the first in the state to do this. So I think at permitting a percentage of the entire area of the property, I think can make sense. So if it's a 25%, no more than 25% of the property area.
Okay.
That, if that seems like a reasonable amount of space for an accessory grocery store to EV charging service station, then
I think that's more clear.
Yeah, I do
But
too.
again, I'm open to
Any
suggestions.
objections to that?
Yeah, that's the next question is 25%. Now we start designing things in absentia with, I agree with you, the
Right.
concept of the percentage, but is it 10%, is it 40%?
Well, I think 25% is the
that's the existing code requirement for
Is
accessory uses,
25%.
is 25%.
We could even forego prescribing a specific percentage and just reference that section of the code where we're talking about, per the rules on, the differential between primary and secondary uses or whatever, and then reference the section of the code that talks about the percentages. That could be an idea as well.
Any objections to that by any of the commissioners?
I mean, that would apply to both D1 and D3.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
we could even just put it as like a new addition, underneath it.
Or you would have to exclude the restaurants. I mean, you can't have it both. You'd have to do one or the other.
Well, we could do it for both, but I'm just saying if we reference that section of the code for this entire thing, that way, the whole passage is subject to the code, and there's no need to do, line 1 has 25%, line 3 has 25%.
No, I'm saying because the lounges and the vending machines, et cetera, doesn't apply to the percentage, so.
I mean, we could have a vending machine that's 3,000 square feet, but I think that would be
Yeah,
really
yeah, that
scary.
would be a
That
little
would be
over the top.
Commissioner Jones, any
That's-
additional?
I mean, I think the idea of just applying a reference back to the original code is fine, but it doesn't apply to all 5 of these items, is all I'm saying.
I understand that, yeah. I mean, we could even put out a call out, specifically with restaurants and grocery stores,
Yeah, I would
reference
def-
this section of the code.
I would defer to staff and legal in terms of where best to place that. My last comment is pertinent to Commissioner Solomon's comments about, of course, the lawyer had to, well, one of the lawyers had to ask the hard technical question. In my mind, and I don't want to oversimplify this, there's very unlikely to ever be a scenario in which the city is building a parking lot for the explicit purpose of it being a parking lot, but then adding in EV charging stations in every single space, thereby making it an EV charging site. So,
Commissioner Solomon?
Sorry, I would say we kind of just did do that with 8120 Santa Monica Boulevard. And if the city of West Hollywood were to do that 20 years in the future from now, they bought a former dry cleaner, it's contaminated, needs to sit for a while, and they put in a temporary surface parking lot, but in 20 years they would have a charger in every single stall. What is that?
But again,
Well,
it's
here's what-
city-owned, so it doesn't matter.
Well, here's what I was going to say. I think it becomes about the intent. Like the city's intent was never to just make it an electric vehicle charging station. I mean, I think that's an important piece of like point of differentiation. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, and that lot is considered temporary, in air quotes, in any case.
right. But do you know what I'm saying, Commissioner Solomon? I think the intent becomes important because it's what makes that use secondary, whether it is technically a charging station or not, or a charging site or not.
I don't know how, I guess that, one, I think that it is a kind of like a ship of Theseus, like thought problem that I've led us down of this sort of change in identity over change in use. Like, does it become a new ship or not?
Right.
But if what Jennifer said earlier is true, that it doesn't matter because nothing applies to the city, and the city can do that by right, then I think that we don't have to
You feel
continue to go down this
comfortable.
rabbit hole.
Okay.
I don't think we need to
Commissioner
discuss it at all, because the city can do what the city wants to do. I mean, they can throw the whole ordinance out.
Right. Okay. Those are my questions and comments.
Great.
Thank you.
Commissioner Caballero?
Yeah, I'm building projects in my head, so some of these questions may relate or may not. So there was a separation, or I think I'm kind of understanding it's much more of a blending, but there was a separation between, charging stations and housing development. But what if a project on Sunset Boulevard on a mixed-use site has housing over a charging station, and they want to put a restaurant in, and how do all these square footages work in that type of scenario where housing is still primary, I'm assuming, and the restaurant and the charging station, which could be used by the people who live in the housing or could also be accessible by the public? We're not precluding any of that.
Right, that's correct. Yeah, that would just be a mixed-use project.
Okay, so a station can be included in a mixed-use project?
Correct,
Yeah,
correct.
Great, that's my only question.
Great. Commissioner Hoopencarter?
Yeah, and I think to your point, I mean, that's one question I had was, my concern was a ground floor that became a charging station, a public charging station, as opposed to the parking available to the residents and the commercial visitors to that building, which would be in air quotes, normal parking, which could have EV charging, as opposed to a destination site that would be about charging. And, envisioning, again, that lot on Sunset where the whole ground floor becomes a charging station with maybe a restaurant there, then we start getting into questions about what we want our ground floor activation to be and all that kind of stuff. Presumably, such a project would have to come under a development agreement, which would allow us the ability to have that conversation. But that's not the primary use. So, but this doesn't seem to address that sort of secondary public use of charging stations. So that's one of my questions.
But it doesn't preclude it,
No.
so
I guess it's something that would have to just come forward and, we go
Right,
through design review and,
Yeah.
all the things and.
Yeah, for me, again, building projects in my head already, I'm thinking of all the retail that's not being used, and how do we change them all into charging stations that could work,
Right.
So I just want to make sure that we leave all options open for.
I mean, for me, as far as my deliberations concerned, I have the corrections I mentioned on page 12, where number 1, which is the maximum of 2 service stations per street intersection. I think it should be 1. I really don't think it should be 2, just as a matter of course, turning us into, gas station row again. There's a reason there's limits If we're going to write new code, I think we should do it correctly.
Are there any
What if-
objections to that suggestion?
Well, what if one has a restaurant and the other one has a grocery store? Or, like...
Well, we're back to, are you building a restaurant or are you building a charging station?
The only other, the only other concern that I would raise with that respectfully is, like in an instance where you look on Santa Monica Boulevard, there's an area of Santa Monica Boulevard, I cannot think of the cross street for the life of me, but there's a Shell gas station, and then there's another gas station on the same block. If in the future...
That's the
both of-
same block, but not the same intersection.
Okay, well, if there was...
Different thing.
I understand. If there was an opportunity where on the same intersection to convert two existing gas stations into two EV charging stations, by reducing to one, we would be eliminating that opportunity.
That doesn't exist in West Hollywood.
I mean,
We don't have an intersection with two gas stations on it.
are you sure about that?
Like, ask staff, but I'm almost certain we don't have any intersections with two gas stations. But in any case, that would be a conversion of a grandfathering of an existing use, not a whole new EV station.
That was going to be my question to you, though. Like, if there was a conversion of, say, the Shell station that's at Laurel and Santa Monica, and then there was another charging station proposed across the street, that's two at the same intersection.
Well, then you get into literal, is it at the intersection or is it mid-block?
But I'm just saying, like, I don't know. I don't know that I would want to preclude that from happening if that was the best use of the site.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to over-regulate it.
I guess I would jump in and say that I understand for the stations, we are going to have discretion to deny that second station diagonally across the street. So perhaps it's best to keep the flexibility, but I defer to my other commissioners.
But if it's in the code, I guess, at the end of the day, I don't see anyone in our city taking our very expensive real estate and turning it into an EV charging station. I just don't see it as an economic decision. Nobody on Sunset Boulevard is going to make a ground floor, one-story EV charging station. It's just not economic. So I think a lot of this is, an exercise in whatever. But I think it should be done correctly, because you never know. I don't love the two service stations on the same intersection, because I don't want in any way for us to, no disrespect to the city of Santa Monica, for us to look like Santa Monica Boulevard through, Auto Alley. To me, it's not our look, it's not how we want to be. I think that is, in terms of our general plan, that is my concern, is having that look. And especially on Sunset Boulevard, since that's where we're talking about it. Yes, it's subject to a CUP, but we get to the situation with the CUP where it's like, well, this is what we're proposing, and we want to do it, and the code doesn't say you can't do it. So then we get caught, So that's my comment on that subject. I'm definitely willing to consider and would be very interested in the percentages under subsection D. But I think this whole business of, is it a restaurant with some parking on it, or is it parking with some restaurant on it, it needs to be addressed. I think that's too confusing. And the same, is it a grocery or convenience store with some parking on it, or is it a parking with a grocery and convenience store?
That was the whole point that we were talking about earlier with the reference to code on the percentage difference.
Yeah, but again, why would we even include this as an incidental service? If you want to build a restaurant with some parking.
Well, because there's existing models where EV charging stations are being built, where their primary purpose is an EV charging station, but they do have a restaurant to serve folks that are waiting for their cars to charge, which usually takes upwards of half an hour.
Right. And that's where, to me, the percentage is more appropriate. I just think it's confusing, and I'm concerned about conflicting codes, but I'll leave that up to staff. I still don't love item number 4. I think that's very confusing. With the vending machines, it's not the end of the world, but I don't think it's well written. And those are my comments. I mean, I'm 100% for EV charging. I mean, people who know me, I've been an environmentalist since I was a baby. I'm 100% behind it. I just want to make sure we do it well and cleanly, and that we don't accidentally encourage things we don't want in the city. And so those are my concerns. And importantly, my concerns are potentially losing housing. I don't think it will happen because, again, the economics aren't there, but who knows?
Any other suggestions? Does staff have any proposed language for us based on the commission's discussion?
Yeah, I wanted to potentially recommend some language regarding, this incidental services and the percentage, and maybe trying to, correlate that with some existing language, and then maybe also recommended proposed finding to insert into the findings section of the ordinance, just so we can clarify that we're allowing accessory uses, et cetera, accessory EV uses. So for incidental services, so this is the top of page 13 of 15 of the ordinance or resolution. So what we'd like to say is incidental service, period, incidental uses, products, and services allowed at EV service stations. Now we're going to insert this new language, shall not exceed 25% of the total floor area of the primary use, and can include, and then it's going to go down the list, grocery or convenience stores. We're going to strike out of less than 3,500 square feet. So just going to say just grocery or convenience stores. We'll leave lounges in as is. Restaurants, striking out the square footage, we'll just say restaurants. And then followed by vending machine sales, provided that no more than 3 machines shall be allowed, and the machines shall be placed, strike next to and we'll just say, shall be placed within 36 inches of the main structure in accordance with the approved plans, and then leave in number 5 other uses that are comparable in terms of scale. So that's one recommendation to incorporate into that section. For the particular additional finding,
I mean, I'll talk to legal, I'll leave it up to you, but when you have a shall not exceed 20%, 25% of, and a colon, the things that follow that should pertain to that 25%. And that's where 4 and 5, well, 2, 4, and 5 don't apply. So just from a structuring standpoint, I think those 3 should be in a whole separate paragraph. And your 25% should apply to the grocery and the restaurants.
I think the intention is that all incidental uses together, because it could potentially be a combination of things.
You make a very good point, and I don't see that in here.
I think
So
let's clarify the language, because the idea is that the 25% would mean all incidental. It's not one. You don't have to pick one of those. It could be a combination.
So then the introductory paragraph under D should be modified to say, shall not exceed a combined use?
A combined, yeah.
a combined 25% of the total floor area.
For all uses.
Now let me ask another twiddly question. 25% of the total square feet of the parcel, or 25% of the project? Because you could have a 2-story EV charging station, couldn't you?
I think it would be of the total square footage of the
project.
Staff, what's your thought on that?
You said primary use. Yeah, he used primary use, so would that, I think that would allow for 2 stories.
Yeah.
But it's a total square footage of the project.
Didn't you say floor area?
So, total floor area of the primary use.
Yeah, so that's different.
Total.
Commissioners, do we all like the proposed language?
I do.
Can I just ask one question?
Go ahead.
The Tesla restaurant that every publication says is in West Hollywood, but it's not. It's City of LA, it's the old Shakey's for staff. Would you consider that an EV service station or a restaurant? I mean, it's literally converting Shakey's where they put charging stations in the parking lot. What's the primary use of
Toxic waste
7001 West Santa Monica Boulevard?
That's precisely my point on this.
Oh, that's, the primary use for that is definitely EV charging.
So that is an EV service station?
That is an EV service station, correct.
Yeah. So is it the restaurant there, I was doing some math, is probably around like 35%. I don't know if that, one, I don't know if Tesla's a good example of anything right now, but if we're going off of kind of our built environment, that wouldn't be allowed under this. The restaurant would exceed the 25% threshold.
Is it 35% of the floor area or 35% of the parcel?
That,
Well,
if you just go floor
we're
area,
clarifying here that it's floor area.
if you
which-
just go floor area, it's 21%. If you
Yeah.
go,
See-
if you add the second floor as a calculation,
Right.
then it exceeds 25.
We can also say 25% of the property area.
I actually think that floor area is a better use because then it allows for a second story while maintaining, you know, the primary use goal, which would be charging, right? We don't want to preclude someone from putting in a two-story restaurant as long as it's not impacting with the primary use of EV charging. So, I mean, I think floor area actually as a best practice would be the way to go personally, but obviously welcome all of the thoughts. of
Acting
everybody.
Director Alkire would like to jump in.
Sorry, Commissioner Matos. And this is why it's difficult to sort of write the ordinances as we're at a hearing, so bear with me here, but floor area is defined in the code, and it does exclude areas used exclusively for parking, so I would really feel like that would be a kind of a disconnect there if we then use it for something that is specifically parking. We could say area of the primary use, we could relate it to the size of the property. We could keep it at the square footage like it was proposed here. We could take a recommendation back that, you know, that we incorporate language in the draft that, or in the ordinance that goes to council that how we convey the intent of this, but that, you know, appropriately limits the size of accessory uses on the site to a percentage.
Yeah, I mean, it might be best for a recommendation at this point, but that gets worked out on the way to council. But I think that the one thing that I was trying to clarify, and again, make decisions as a body, so I welcome everyone's feedback, is my intent was not to preclude EV service station from doing a two-story restaurant, right? It was more of to allow that kind of use while also ensuring that charging remains the primary goal. Just because you have a two-story restaurant that might exceed the proposed 3,000 square feet doesn't mean that it is no longer charging as a primary use, in my opinion.
Ms. Alkire, what is your suggestion on how to proceed on this issue?
So I'm trying to follow, and I think what I'm hearing from Commissioner Hoopengarner is that if you have a multi-story parking structure that is a charging station, and you take 25% of that, that's quite a large space. Is that the direction that we're going? And so we may want to think about that differently because it's not necessarily surface parking. I'm also hearing that we maybe want to allow for larger appurtenant structures or accessory uses on the site. So I guess I'm not clear on what the intent of the body is on this.
Well, I think it boils down to the fact of the matter, especially in this whole restaurant scenario, is it a restaurant with some parking on it, or is it some parking with a restaurant on it?
Right.
And so, and it gets back to, I guess, if it's a restaurant with some parking, then technically you pull up you need to be going into the restaurant to use the restaurant in order to park there, use the valet, the whatever. If it's a EV charging station with a restaurant on it, then anybody should be able to go up and use the charging regardless of whether or not they're going to the restaurant, correct? So I mean, maybe that somehow we make the distinction, and maybe there's some way to use that language to distinguish between, again, the restaurant is not the primary use, the parking is the primary use.
So I don't see that as a problem we need to solve in the ordinance. To me, that is what is being entitled. So if someone comes in and says, I want to have a restaurant and I want to have EV charging, that's what we talked about before when I was up here, right? Is that there's an amenity to that restaurant that is parking, and they are putting EV chargers in there, and so those patrons of the restaurant can use that. If they get it entitled with a CUP as a charging station and they have a restaurant there, then their conditions will apply in a different way. So that will kind of dictate how the property is used on an entitlement basis.
And hence the CUP.
In a CUP in the conditions of approval.
So you would say then that the Tesla structure is a restaurant?
I don't, again, it's difficult to talk about this in theoreticals. I don't know what you mean by
But
a
I mean,
Tesla structure.
that's a practical one. That,
Okay.
Like they took a restaurant.
Uh-huh.
It was an existing restaurant. They slapped the name of the electric car maker on it, but it's still a restaurant. And they put chargers in the parking lot.
If they entitle it as a charging station, then it would be conditioned as a charging station. If we want to put limits on how big that restaurant can be in order for it to still be a charging station. But if someone got entitled for a restaurant and they wanted as part of their restaurant to have people be able to use and pay for charging at that site, that's something that I think can be done as just part of the restaurant. That's not a primary use, right? If the restaurant is larger and that's truly the primary use on the structure on the site, then that can be what's entitled there.
Commissioner Jones is wanting to jump in.
Yeah, you raise a good question, Jennifer Alkire. Can I just, acting director? I don't know, it seems weird to call you that, even though you are. Maybe then it is, because what you're saying, and I agree, is that if someone wants to build a restaurant with charging on it, then they can just apply for a restaurant entitlement. It doesn't need, it's like no one's trying to get one over on us by having a charging station that has a very large restaurant on it. They would just apply to have a restaurant, right? I mean, presumably. So I think the intent is it's going to be a true charging station that we would want its primary use to be a charging station, and thus any other accessory uses should not exceed 25%. I think that's but if that's already implicit, and this is what I was saying, in the code, then.
Well, then it comes back to 25% of what?
Right, and I think that's maybe where we landed with just the
averages.
3,000 square feet or what have you, because it's difficult there's a lot of different scenarios. So if we say, yes, an appropriate amount of space to be used on an average site is 3,000 square feet for this, and then you can still get your CUP for a charging station. I mean, keep in mind that these are CUPs, so these are things that come to the Planning Commission.
They're discretionary.
They're discretionary. Right. They have conditions of approval, and we'll be looking into all of that. So these are not going to be.
Nothing is set in stone.
Yeah,
right.
It's not an over-the-counter approval type of thing.
In light of the further discussion, does the commissioners feel like we should stay with the originally proposed language involving 3,000, 3,500 square feet?
I'd be curious what the staff recommendation is.
Yeah, would it be 25% or 3,000, whatever is lower? I mean,
I think the goal was just to make sure that we weren't being overly prescriptive, but if the staff recommendation is to continue in this charted path, sure.
Yeah, again, brand new code, never been done before. So, we provided sort of like the averages that we think are, reasonable, where it's not going to be the overarching use. It still requires a conditional use permit, we're comfortable with the numbers that we presented in the staff report, but are also comfortable with doing percentages. That's really not a big deal.
My question is this too. I'm fine with sticking with these as long as it is implicit, because it is in another part of the code that an accessory use is not more than 25%. And I know what you're saying of what, but also maybe this is something that we can.
Well, let's be careful though, because this language is about incidental service, not accessory use. So that could obviate what you're talking about.
If there's an internal inconsistency in the zoning ordinance in these sections that are very closely related, so if it can be interpreted a certain way, the most restrictive will apply. That's a provision in the code, so, you know,
But we don't want
in
to
as far as
set
that
up code
happens.
to conflict either.
No, of course not. But as Francisco mentioned earlier, we are bringing an item to clean up our accessory uses, so we can have this conversation again.
And an incidental service is considered an accessory use.
Yeah.
So,
unless
is there
it's
any
defined.
objection to going with the original staff language?
No.
Did you have some proposed language in response to what Commissioner Matos had suggested as to?
Yes, maybe potentially adding an additional finding to the sections finding in the resolution. So we would add it to both the resolution and the ordinance. So maybe inserting it in, in the resolution as right underneath, in between B and C. So we'll make C, D, et cetera, et cetera. And also in the ordinance, instead of finding, well, a new finding, we'll call it B1 for now, but it will obviously cascade and changes. We'll say electric vehicle charging infrastructure is already permitted as an accessory use to any lawfully established primary use in all commercial zones within the city. This accessory use pathway ensures that the property owners and tenants citywide can install EV chargers to support their customers, employees, or operations without requiring a zone change or discretionary approval, provided the installation applies with the applicable development, safety, and environmental standards.
That captures my intent, if everyone's
Any
good.
objections to that? Okay, I think the last issue that I heard was Commissioner Hoopengarner's idea to limit the stations to only one corner. I'm not sure there was majority support there, but I just want to make sure. I want to make sure her idea is fully heard and considered. By show of hands, how many people were in favor of Commissioner Hoopengarner's idea to limit it to one corner? I don't see support for that. In light of that, is there anyone who would like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
And this is a motion to incorporate the language as
proposed, read in by staff, the findings language, yeah.
I'll second.
Are we fixing D4?
Any further discussion?
Are we fixing D4?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not
The
sure
vending
what you're
machine,
referring
the
to.
correction that staff submitted?
Just a little clarification on the vending machines, just to make it
yes.
clear.
The staff proposed clarification?
Correct.
Yes.
It was striking next to, and I think it was just within 36 inches, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Okay. All of that, there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, let's go to a vote.
And the motion passes with 6 ayes, noting Chair Lombardi absent, approving resolution number PC 25-1599. This is a recommendation going forward toward the City Council.
Great, thank you so much. We'll move on to new business. There is none. Unfinished business, there is none. Excluded consent calendar, there is none. Items from staff, planning manager's update.
Thank you, Chair. No major update from the planning manager, but I'd like to provide you sort of an overview of the upcoming meetings, sort of like the next item. So for the May 15th Planning Commission meeting, we have a ZTA where we're going to be discussing accessory business uses. So we're trying to sort of expand and be a little bit more creative with the allowed uses that that are possible with to add some flexibility for businesses that are trying to create new business models which are currently not permitted per our code. And then we're also going to provide you an overview of the general plan and housing element annual progress reports. So that'll just be a presentation from staff just to give you an update on how we're doing with the implementation of the housing element and our RENA numbers. On June 5th, we do have 4 items. There is a conditional use permit amendment. It says here for 8300 Sunset Boulevard. A ZTA for commercial to residential conversions is coming before you. There's also consideration of an expansion of 8020 Santa Monica Boulevard. That's a new gas station. Interesting. Related to what we were discussing today. And then there's an appeal regarding 8451 Melrose Avenue. So that must be a director's hearing appeal that's coming to the Planning Commission. Wanted to note that the June 19th meeting is canceled, as well as a July 3rd Planning Commission meeting. So then the following meeting will be July 17th. So just want to provide you an overview of that. For the Long Range Planning Project Subcommittee, we are discussing emergency specialized housing. That's for the May 15th meeting, so we will be meeting on that date. And then we won't meet again until July 17th, so I'll spare you the details on that meeting at the moment. And then there are no design review subcommittee or SASE meetings scheduled in the near future. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Any questions? Great. Public comment. Secretary Gillig, do we have any additional public comment?
Chair, we have no public comment.
Items from commissioners. Anything from commissioners? Commissioner Cavallero.
Yeah, I'm not going to be here for the May 15th meeting, but I'm available to do it via Zoom if you can, if it's possible. I'm happy to participate.
Anybody else? Commissioner Hoopengartner.
Just a note for the secretary. I found the correction in question. It's on page 42 on line 15. The commission is limited to considering the appoints and the subject matter of the appeal. I believe that's supposed to be points.
Noted.
Great. Anything else? Wonderful. At this point, I will adjourn the meeting. I'm adjourning the meeting to the next regularly scheduled meeting that will take place on Thursday, May 15th, 2025, right here in council chambers at 6:30 p.m. Have a good night, everybody.